Okay, is that better? Okay, can you hear me? You can hear me now? Okay. I can hear myself with an echo. Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm not sure how to fix this, but if it's not good, let me know. As I was saying, thank you for all the emails, and I was to say they all came in. I can't hear myself in my own ear. In the last hour or two, they all kind of came in on yesterday's podcast with a lot of questions, and so let me figure this out. And so a lot of them were, thank you very much. We had no idea what this project was, and I appreciate that. Remember something, the goal at this point is not to kill the project or get support for the project or be against the project. The project has passed. It's going to happen. There's no question about that. It's now just talking about the reality of it and talking about the political realities and some of the games we saw played around this progress. And so, around this project. And so, yesterday, the fact is, yes, we are having less units for the poorest people. It fits the definition of affordable housing according to the law, but that's why the law is awful. It doesn't account for projects like this, and it doesn't do anything. You know, I called the organization that awarded the funding and said, did you look at other options? Did you look at a value proposition? Did you look at better ways of spending the money? Their answer was no. We get the application, we approve it. And this law is bad for that reason. If anything, as taxpayers, we should be asking a very simple question, whether we're for or against the project. Are we getting value for that project? For example, I'm sure tonight is the Branford budget vote. They'll be talking about Walsh Intermediate School. And there's a reason Walsh Intermediate School was designed the way it was. The law was written so that you maximize your reimbursement dollars from the state by designing it that way. They could have tore it down and built new, but they would have gotten less money back. So they saved money by designing with a current facility. There were things people wanted, like fields, which were not included because we could not get reimbursed for those. There was a plan, hopefully, if there's money left over in the project, to build those fields down the road. I know a lot of parents want to hear that because we've gotten calls on that. And I know parents have been talking about hearing that tonight. There will be more fields in Branford in the future. The question is, what's the most value we can get? We want our elected officials using our tax dollars as if they were their own. That if you're going to spend it in a way that's wise, that makes sense. Some things we're adding to the budget make sense to me. We're adding a kind of mental health position from the counseling center and the police department who will work together. That makes sense. I can understand that. I want it to be town run. So there are private entities that can provide that and contract out for it. I would rather it be town run at decisions being made tonight. There is one or two other new positions being added. One is with the community house in the Parks and Recreation. They're adding a department that does more arts and events and plays and camps, and it makes a lot of sense, especially after COVID, to make that a full-time position. Some things make sense. We're getting value for that spending, whether it's a $50,000 position or an $88 million project. Elected officials would say, are we getting value for that? With projects like Parkside, $20 million. It's actually more than that. It's $18 million in tax credits. They get 60.5 plus another $4+ million grant. So $22 million for 60 units. There's 67 units going in, but 70 are at market rate for 60 units. So basically we're at, what's that, $360,000 a unit? Now you tell me, you couldn't have gotten, I don't know, before COVID, condos in Branford, 2-3 bedroom condos in Branford for $230, $240? You couldn't have done that? Housed a lot more people? Instead, this is the way the law is written. It's a bad law. That said, it's the law. And this project's going forward. There's no other way around that. The first selectman handled it correctly. He put somebody in place to manage these meetings correctly. Hopefully start doing meeting minutes having proper records, having legal votes, that makes sense. He did the right thing. But in the selectmen's meeting last week, a letter was read, and I didn't read, I heard some of it then because Selectman Ray Dunbar at the time read some of it. And I have since gone to town hall and asked for a copy of this letter. And one, I'm shocked Ray Dunbar read it. Two, I'm shocked he let it become a deciding factor in his vote. But three, I'm just shocked at the amount of misinformation. And I'm going to read this. I opened it up on my computer. I'll post this later. And it is a letter. So the agenda for the selectmen's meeting went out the day before. So clearly the affordable housing people went a little crazy and tried to make sure they had their key people in place. And the Connecticut Fair Housing Center and other people wrote letters saying this is awful and terrible and we're going to sue you. So a letter comes in from the Connecticut Fair Housing Center. It's addressed to James Cosgrove, who was our first selectman, not to the Board of Selectmen, which is interesting. All right. So, but not to the whole board, to the first selectman. Somehow Mr. Dunbar got a copy of it. Maybe they sent him one too. I don't know. But this is basically political posturing. So once people found out that Jamie was going to put Bob Imparato on the board and not reappoint Tacey Lowe, whose term had ended, they basically fell for the nonsense that was being spread that Jamie was trying to kill this affordable housing project. Couldn't do it legally, but whatever. And so they write this letter, and Dunbar reads this letter at the meeting. Here's what it says, and I'm not going to read the entire thing, but you're going to get the gist pretty quickly. The Connecticut Fair Housing Center is a statewide organization with a mission to ensure all people in Connecticut have the opportunity to live in housing of their choice, free from unlawful discrimination. For the past several years, the center has monitored Branford Housing Authority's efforts to redevelop Parkside 1. It is apparent that the redevelopment will offer accessible, modern housing for current tenants and additional families to be served through the addition of units. The proposal both fulfills BHA's obligations to its existing tenants and contributes to addressing Connecticut's profound lack of affordable housing and entrenched racial and economic segregation. So right now, the code word is everybody yells race now because that's the emotional thing. And if you dare try to question if race is involved, then you're racist. That's just the game we're playing right now in society. It's ridiculous, but whatever. That's just what they do. These organizations have an agenda. They have money to spend. They're funded by that agenda. They have an objective. There is a history of serious opposition to and obstruction of the redevelopment effort by the town of Branford, raising serious concerns about its compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So I'm going to read that sentence again. There is a history of opposition to and obstruction of the redevelopment effort by the town of Branford, raising serious concerns about its compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So this letter is written by somebody named Aaron Kemple. So to Aaron and to Selectman Ray Dunbar, who read this letter, prove it. Show me where the town of Branford had opposition and obstruction to this redevelopment. Show me. You can't. Here's what actually happened. Beacon came forward with an application that had nothing to do with affordable housing. They did not come under the 830G statutes. Just a regular development. They couldn't get it passed. The thing was too big. It didn't fit the neighborhood. There was clearly opposition in the neighborhood. They removed their application. They wanted to do something. The first selectman, in support of an open process, held a meeting with many members of the press, including myself at the time, someone from the Branford Eagle, someone from the Shore Publishing, Pam Johnson was there, someone from the New Haven Register was there, and Dara Covell, who's the head of Beacon. She answered a bunch of questions on what the project was, and Jamie wanted to make sure at that meeting, as he said, that accurate information was getting out, realizing that there was a lot of false information going public. Dara explained it. At that meeting, I asked repeatedly, will you come in using the 830G statute? The 830G statute essentially allows you to avoid many of the stipulations you would have under a normal application. She wouldn't answer the question. Finally, she said, we'll do what we have to do. Soon after, they made an application under 830G. This was not supposed to be an affordable housing application. The town not only didn't actively fight it or try to destroy the project, Jamie Cosgrove took steps and held meetings that accurate information directly from Dara Covell, the head of Beacon, would get public. That's what happened. That's not obstruction. And after that, we all wrote articles and posted them. From there, Beacon applied under the 830G statutes, which basically gave them a green light to get it done. Their first proposal wasn't very good and had stipulations, and it was turned down. There was a question on whether it could legally be turned down. They went to court. They won in court. It came back. They reapplied. It was approved. It was approved with a stipulation in it, and I'll tell you what that stipulation was. As part of the approval, Beacon understood that it needed to have a secondary access for emergency. You have a tall building here. You got to get people out in an emergency. You had to have at least 2 places a fire truck can get in. They designed a road to go on, access to go on Sliney Road. Sliney Road exists now. It leads to the ball fields in the back of the Beacon property. It is on town property. Tim Hollister represented Beacon, and he got up and gave a list of stipulations that were okay for him. And his stipulations were that they get approval from the owner of the property that would make sure that property was always available for emergency access. So they were designing their project to fit not just on their own property, but on property they didn't own. And they voluntarily said, we have to get approval from that other property owner. Planning and zoning said, sure. And they passed it with that stipulation. What I knew, what everybody knew, was there was no political will to give up access to town property, nor should there be. That town property at some point will likely be sold. It's the old Indian Neck School. At some point, that building's going to have to come down and something happen to it, or be sold or moved or what have you, and it made no sense to devalue that property. Now, there were some people on the RTM who had a vote for that, who would not have voted for it because they didn't want Beacon to happen. That's true. But the truth of the matter is, the town was not going to vote to approve giving property they owned to Beacon, to a Branford-based $100 million corporation, and devalue their own property. That made no sense. So Tim Hollister realized that he had agreed to a stipulation that he was never going to get. So he sued again. At no point, ever, did the town sue Beacon. At no point, ever, did the town sue the Branford Housing Authority. In every single step of the way, including an approval by the town, lawsuits were initiated by Beacon and the Branford Housing Authority. Mr. Dunbar, this sentence I'll read again. There is a history of opposition to and obstruction of the redevelopment effort by the town of Branford. Bullshit, Mr. Dunbar. You're lying. Bullshit, Aaron Kemple, Esquire. You're lying. There is no history of obstruction. It doesn't exist. They came in with multiple plans, changing it multiple times, agreeing to stipulations, then changing their mind multiple times. That's what they did. These meetings are recorded. They're a fact. Mr. Dunbar, stop lying in meetings. We'll go further. After years of discriminatory community opposition stoked by town zoning officials in 2 land use cases lost by the town, BHA secured funding to complete the redevelopment of Parkside 1. Wait a minute. Years of discriminatory community opposition stoked by town zoning officials? You better have some evidence, Mr. Dunbar. What officials are you talking about? What officials do you say push discrimination in our neighborhood? Mr. Dunbar, you're running for office. The people you're looking to represent should know who you think is discriminatory. We want names. You show me what zoning officials did anything to get neighbors against the project. Show me. Those 2 cases lost by the town were not initiated by the town. The town was defending itself, its planning and zoning process. That's how this works. Even under 830G, you still need a vote. That's how it works. You don't lose your right to have a planning and zoning process and vote legally because it's 830G. Mr. Dunbar, let us know who you think is racist and discriminatory. I want names. You and your ticket, Mr. Brockett, let us know names. Let us know that you feel our town departments are racist and discriminatory. Tell it now. We just had this in the presidential address. The Republican accused the Democrat of being racist and discriminatory. And Biden had to ask if he felt the country was racist. You answered the question, Dunbar. You want to get up on a town meeting recorded with your little friends there to fight this nomination, claiming this is what the town did, and you know full well it's false? Prove it. Name names. This is the nonsense we have to get. The multi-year history of this redevelopment effort is rife with opposition based not on what is being built, but on who will live there. I was at those meetings. Is there any building in this neighborhood that looks anywhere remotely close to this building? It's a neighborhood of single-family homes and two-story condos. The current facility are 2 stories high. You're replacing it with a 3.5-story single building with 67 units. Had nothing to do with who lived there, because the people who live there now are the poorest of the poor that live on government benefits, and that's it. Had nothing to do with who was going to live there. The project didn't make sense in the neighborhood, and they couldn't even design it on their own property. They needed a court order for the town to use to be able to take town property for emergency access. Show me any other building in this neighborhood that looks like this building. Mrs. Kemple, show me. There's a line in here I read that just threw me off. He shows, this is great. This pattern is reflected by statements by the public to whom town officials are accountable and statements by officials themselves. I'd love to see them. Love to see it. Courts, now, what residents say. I want to see officials that said something that they don't want these people living here. Show me. Mr. Dunbar, you show me. Mrs. Kemple, you show me. But here's the sentence that I like. Courts have found that even code words, commonly understood to refer to racial animus, support a finding of discrimination, yet many statements in the record require little code breaking. So basically, they're doing the same thing that you're yelling race. And if you say, we don't want a certain, crime here, it's just code for race. That's what they're saying. That's been saying forever. It's nonsense, but fine. But they referred to it, we don't want New Haven here, we don't want to be the ghetto, we don't want to, everybody says that. It's not racist. And just give a little history. I grew up in Derby. Every kind of race you can possibly want, and nobody's rich in Derby. Nobody is rich in Derby. I lived in Brooklyn for a year, and after that, for 6 years, I lived in West Haven, on the West Haven Orange Line in an apartment. Nobody's rich in West Haven, and it's incredibly diverse. I know what it's like to live in poor areas. I generally don't care if I live in a wealthy area or not. If I had kids in a family, it might be a different story. I'm single, I don't give a damn. I never cared. So I don't know who this attorney is writing this, or where Ray Dunbar lives and what area of town he lives in. But there's nothing remotely close to the ghetto or of the different element or whatever it is that means race. Because I've lived in really poor areas and it was as diverse as it gets. Every race, from Chinese people to Indian people to black people to white people. And most low-income areas are that way. By saying that it means race, you're kind of being the racist person. But here's the great sentence. The meaning is clear when members of an affluent and disproportionately white community adjacent to New Haven complain that Section 8 will bring the ghetto or lead to a different element or too much riffraff. An affluent or disproportionately white community. So I'm going to do this. This is that window. You probably can't see it. Down that street, you can see me, about 450 yards is Parkside. So I live about 450 yards from Parkside. Straight down the street, Melrose, Indian Neck School, Parkside. That's where I live. I can tell you this as a fact. There are apartments on my street and in this neighborhood that will be less expensive than the apartments in Parkside. You understand what I'm saying to you? There are people I live next to with, what have you, that pay under $1,000 in rent. There will be Parkside units still considered affordable housing at $1,000 and over. There will be Parkside units likely at $1,500 to $1,800 that are market rate. This is not an affluent area, Mr. Dunbar. If you like, I will meet you in the area and walk you around the area. There's nothing remotely affluent about it. We have middle class at best, houses selling in the high twos, apartments. We have multiple different races, every age group you can possibly imagine. My neighbors in general are between 60 and 80. There's nothing affluent about the neighborhood. Yet you went on a town meeting and opposed a proposed person for a committee based on a letter that we were affluent, that we're racist, and completely false information about the town's actions. You're an elected official, Mr. Dunbar, and you lied about your own town, the town you're running to represent. I can't make that up. The town never sued Beacon, never sued the Parkside Project, never sued the Branford Housing Authority. Never happened. They defended themselves even after filing an approval with stipulations put in there by Tim Hollister, the attorney for Beacon. Every step of the way, it was Beacon changing the plan, coming back again. Not affordable housing, then affordable housing. Changing it multiple times with parking lots, access, agreeing to access roads, then complaining about it. They came forward looking for a Melrose Avenue access. That was denied. That was a road through the middle of town property that would have devalued town property. In fact, even Robin Comey, the Democratic state representative, voted against that. Mr. Dunbar, you should have to answer for your actions if you're going to go to a meeting and slander our town. But even more is this. This company, this letter, I'm going to open it up again, is written by Aaron Kemple, the executive director of the Connecticut Fair Housing Center. Mr. Dunbar, no way in hell, in a million years, should some outside group determine who gets to serve on Branford's boards and commissions. I don't care who you are. When outside groups get to tell our elected officials who they can appoint to town boards and commissions, we have a serious problem. If that's the way you think you should govern, if that's the way Tom Brockett thinks he should govern because that's your running mate, tell us now. Let us know. Because we're going through this problem in Hartford now with zoning issues, where New Haven wants to tell us what our zoning should be, where big cities want to tell smaller cities what their zoning should be. And now, according to you, reading this letter, outside forces like large cities should tell us who we can put on town boards and commissions. No, Mr. Dunbar, I disagree. So let us know what your stance is. As part of your platform, which we haven't heard yet, let us know what your stance is. Now, we did hear at that meeting something very interesting. Wayne Cook, who is basically conspiracy theorist in town, who has attacked anybody and anybody who doesn't feel like talking to or wants to get attention, we get his game, asked to spend 10 minutes at the next meeting presenting a conspiracy theory that Tabor property was being sold illegally. Nobody wants to hear that. But you stood up and said, wait, I want to give him 10 minutes at the next meeting. Mr. Dunbar, if you're going to do that, you should probably also give 10 minutes to QAnon and maybe 10 minutes to explain why 9/11 was an inside job. That being said, our meetings are not to be hijacked by foreign companies and organizations. They're not going to be your little conspiracy theory sessions. Grow up. But let us know how you plan to govern. If outside groups are going to influence your decisions, let us know. If groups that have nothing to do with Branford are going to influence your decisions, let us know. If you're going to read their letters that slander and disparage our town, let us know. If you're going to read letters that slander and disparage planning and zoning officials, let us know. If you're going to read letters that are false, and if you're going to lie, let us know now. Say it. We have your record so far, and it's not good. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Guys, thanks for joining me. I hope everyone has a great night. We will talk to you tomorrow at 4.